So thank you again, everyone, for joining this virtual roundtable for applied clinical trials. We're going to be discussing patient centricity today, and we have several folks on the line with us. We have FABIO Gratton, who is the founder of and CEO of CureClick, ABBE Steele, who is the founder of HealthiVibe, Tyler Truig, who's the product manager at TrialReach, as well as Sean VASSILAROS, who's the partner and COO at Thread Research. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We have a few questions for you. So, actually, 4 of them. So, my first question is this. The topic of patient centricity has been, discussed over the past several years and seems to have different interpretations from different stakeholders. So, can each of you elaborate on, what patient centricity means to you? And if you can state your name before talking, that would be great. So, Fabio, let's start with you.
Okay. Absolutely. All right. Thank you. This is Fabio. So, for through my lens, patient centricity really is first of all, is something that has to be looked at in reality and taken seriously and not just be a buzzword, because that's unfortunately what it's become in a lot of the industry. And it really means not only sort of walking in the patient's shoes, seeing the world through their eyes, and really understanding their needs, which requires interacting with patients and listening to them, and truly making them a partner and part of the solutions that we create as an industry. So that, in its simplest term to me, is patient centricity, is really standing where the patient stands and breathing like the patient breathes.
Yeah, and hey, this is Sean over at Thread Research. Just to echo what Fabio said, we strongly believe that the patient needs to be a part of the research process, right? They have a voice. People are more educated now than they've ever been. They care more than they've ever cared. They feel like they have more responsibility and actual power to be able to affect change in the world today. And so our goal should be to allow them to have a voice, not just in figuring out what their role is in research and in studies moving forward, but also to help craft exactly what should be studied and what's important to them.
Yeah, Sean, this is Tyler. Sean, I totally agree. And, one key thing that I wanted to pull out from what you just said is giving them the power to access this information, make their own decisions. And with the prevalence of the internet and medical records and everything going into a lot of different technical avenues, it's really the access to this information and empowering patients to make their own educated decisions and not being gated by traditional models, by their own physicians. They can research it on their own. They can access this information, either find trials, find new treatments, find medical information. And that is really giving them the access and letting them make decisions. What Fabio said is absolutely what patient centricity is about.
This is Abby. I agree with everything that everybody said, and as a company that is all about the patient voice, everything you all are saying certainly rings true for me and what we're trying to achieve. If I can add on to that, I would say from a pharmaceutical company perspective, I think what's really critical for thinking patient centricity is that patients are considered as just as an important stakeholder as prescribers, investigators, payers, regulators, because I think that a lot of the patient centricity is kind of a nice to have, and to truly be a company that puts the patient first and thinks about the patient and gives them a voice and lets them have a say in all these really cool gadgets, it really doesn't matter if it's really just sort of a value add, or we're doing it because we think that there's a shift in sort of the role of the patient. So having patients have a seat at the table, letting them be an important stakeholder that actually has an ROI attached to it. That if a if a product manager doesn't have a good, solid product launch at a company, they may be fired. If a patient centricity manager doesn't have a good patient centricity project at a company, oh, well, we tried, we piloted it, and it's kind of, there's no skin in the game when it comes to the patient. And so it's kind of putting a little bit of put your money where your mouth is kind of thing. But I would sort of add that on to everything that everyone has also said so far.
Well,
that's an excellent point, Abby, and I totally support that. The fact that so many different enterprises are focusing on trying to get their clinical trials done. A lot of us oftentimes forget what happens after the clinical trial is over and we're ready to approach payers. And oftentimes, especially nowadays, payers are engaging patients and patient advocacy groups to be able to determine what the value of the medical product is. And if we forget that the patient is really at the center of the clinical trials, as well as of the value, demonstrating the value of the medical product, I think it's critical to engage patients and involve them throughout the clinical trial process so that they can perceive and understand what that value is. So excellent discussion here. I have another question. Can you elaborate on the challenges associated with patient centricity and engagement? Why is it important to engage patients and enhance patient centricity in clinical trials?
Hey, this is Sean from Thread Research. One of the challenges that we've heard, and when talking to researchers and talking to analysts, it's been that because there's usually an overwhelming response of people that want to play, it's almost nearly impossible and completely unprecedented to be able to deal with the data that's gathered and to be able to pivot and make educated changes based on that information. Now, while that's only one major challenge, it's a pretty big one. Are researchers set up to be able to deal with the data from an engaged community?
In terms of the challenges that I've been seeing and hearing, I think there's a lot of challenges when it comes to companies' fear of taking risks, fear of hearing about adverse events. We've heard all about that with social media concerns. Fear of getting slapped on the wrist for off-label discussions. And really, it's a culture where, I started working at Sanofi 25 years ago, and I'll never forget my very first week there. All I did all day every day for a week was watch videos on how to handle myself at a cocktail party if somebody brings up our industry or one of our drugs and what not to say and to run away, basically. And I haven't seen much of a change since then. So there's this culture where we should stay at arm's length. There's always a healthcare provider in between the sponsors and the patients. And so it's a real challenge to get around the culture where you have legal, you have compliance, you have privacy, you have regulatory. 4 different groups I deal with every day on the phone that are really keeping teams, keeping innovators sort of away from patient centricity efforts. And that is a big challenge that I think even those that are at the forefront of patient centricity are challenged with every single day within their job.
We've had, this is Tyler, we've had 2 unique challenges working directly with sponsors, and this is more geared towards my role now and less the pharmaceutical industry. But we have a little bit of a 2-way interaction of trying to get information from the sponsors to the patients, of making it in a more patient-friendly way, trying to translate what is appropriate. And we've had an interesting challenge of trying to translate what is important to a sponsor versus what's important to a patient. We found a lot of the frame is really, this is all scientific. How do we make medical terminology patient-friendly? And we've run into some challenges where it really comes down to maybe it's just more of a pragmatic approach of what are you actually trying to accomplish with this trial. It's not so much of let me educate you, it's let's bring you to the table. It's make this an equal conversation because we both have different perspectives. And then going the other direction of once we are gathering information on patients or learning insights, Abby, to your comment, it's we take that information inside this culture that's not normally used to it, and they're like, okay, that's great, but what do we do with it, or can we act on it? It's a little bit of a false start, a hesitation on using that information to actually have the two-way conversation. I think there's been a wall, and maybe it's getting shorter, but the wall is still definitely there for us.
Yeah, and this is Fabio, and just to add on to a few of the things that were said, and certainly what Sean said about collecting the data, and it's not an insignificant challenge. I would also add to that when you collect data, you need to have a means to process and analyze it, and therefore some clear objectives. And just like anything, when you listen, you need to be, if you choose to listen, you need to respond and act, and that's the expectation that gets set. People don't like to just give data. People don't like to just talk and be, in a vacuum if nobody's going to respond. And so, unfortunately, this is not really built into the clinical trial culture. It's not built into the operational systems within the clinical trial infrastructure today. And I don't mean the trial itself. I mean the entire landscape of players, the people who help structure trials and recruit for trials. And, it's just not built into that overall, that sensitivity and sensibility. There's little training, limited experience, lack of resources, and all that leads to ultimately a fear, really a massive fear of failing. It's not that I think we would all agree to this, it's not that there's a lack of appreciation of the importance of the patient. I think there's a really big fear of the moment that you really engage and you truly put the patient first. Does your organization have the capacity and capability to really be able to respond and behave like a patient-centric organization? It's almost people would rather not try and therefore not fail rather than try and fail. And I think that's a big challenge. It's a cultural one.
I resonate with all of, what's resonating here is that there are cultural challenges within biopharmaceutical companies. And I can totally relate to what Abby was saying even earlier. I just remember those adverse event trainings. What happens when you're sitting on a plane next to someone and you hear an adverse event? What are you supposed to do? Who are you supposed to report it to? It really comes down to, I think, cultural changes. I think what I have seen is that biopharmaceutical companies, some of them at least, have actually established pharmacovigilance infrastructures to report those adverse events should they run across them. And they're saying, hey, bring it on. We want to hear what those adverse events are. And some of the feedback even from the FDA and pharmaceutical companies is that, pharmaceutical companies seem to be afraid of just going out there and putting feelers out to patients because in case they run into adverse events, they may not want to deal with processing all those adverse events. Whereas the FDA, on the other hand, is saying, we're not going to touch this either. We're not going to go out there and actively seek those adverse events because it's just an exhaustive resource strain on both ends. So it's been sort of kind of left alone. But I think we're eventually going to have to address this. The FDA, for example, launched the Sentinel initiative to evaluate through EMR data what those adverse events are for patients and have those reported in the adverse event reporting system. But the key here is that I think pharmaceutical companies need to really take this challenge as technology advances and figure out efficient ways to process and deal with those adverse events as we run across them. So my last question is this. Technology is really fascinating compared to the industry itself, which is a very slow-moving industry. And technology is very fast-paced, very right now. And what's really interesting is that technology is sort of pushing biopharmaceutical enterprises to innovate, to think beyond the walls that we've thought for in the last 20 years. This question involves, where is technology headed in terms of, how it's influencing clinical research, and how will technology disrupt the clinical trials patient engagement paradigm?
Yeah, hey, this is Sean over at Thread Research. This technology thing is something that we're incredibly passionate about. And we firmly believe that technology is already leaps and bounds ahead of where the research industry is and should be. And that right now the limiting factor is no longer technology or the ability to collect and process data. The limiting factor is how much data is out there and the ability to take that data and come up with and analyze it and come up with conclusions. The announcements with Dr. Watson starting to play in healthcare, with Apple and Google coming up with, research kit and tools that will help take everyday devices and turn them into data-gathering devices and being able to share that with large communities. Researchers are going to have access to real-time data like they've never had before. And so, we strongly believe that we're right at a pivotal point in this entire industry where technology is going to force those that have, that have thought about research the traditional way. It will force them to evolve and adapt and take advantage of this technology, or they're going to be left in the dust.
Yeah, and one interesting piece on with all of the data that's being collected, a very easy approach to start using the technology is, well, now we can start. I'll take the recruitment side of we can now better recruit our trials, but where I think the technology is going to start shifting is with so many different ways of collecting this data, so many the diverse types of data being collected. It's not so much that, okay, now we can go find these patients better. It's we can start influencing the way we are doing research, changing how the clinical trials are actually designed, what key outcomes are trying to be targeted to actually make a population improvement, not so much of just getting this drug to market in some way. I think that's where the technology is going to start shifting the way clinical research is conducted, and very exciting times for that for sure.
I think that as we're applying different technologies more and more for trials and patient programs and different apps or mobile devices or BYOD, I think really what we're starting to learn from all this is what technologies are best for what projects, for what clinical trials, what adherence programs, which patient population, what age group, disease area, which country, what are the country regulations. And we need to start almost together, I think, as an industry, kind of gather up all this learning and kind of try to move the needle together from what we're learning and sharing it at these conferences like we're doing and other venues, because the one-size-fits-all we all know doesn't work. And somebody has a great successful kind of hybrid or virtual trial using one technology, and then they don't understand why did it fail with this other study, this other patient population. And maybe because we have no data or information on that other group. And one of the things that I've been hearing and talking to thousands of patients over the last year is I can walk into a room of a group of, 25, 40-year-old women, and every single one of them would love the free Fitbit. And then I walk into a room with what I think is pretty much the same population, maybe just a different disease area, and nobody wants the Fitbit. And trying to understand that and then apply that, I think our technology will be adopted even faster and faster if we can learn from some of that and really get to that granular of a level with our programs.
Yeah, I'm going to just take a different, because everybody's already said all the good stuff, so I'm just going to take a slightly different take on that, which is I think a lot of people think about innovation, specifically that's being driven by technology in terms of two things. They think in terms of invention and they think in terms of risk. I think there's an element of that, but I also think that there's an element, and I really want to tip my hat off to the people on the panel specific. I think there's an element of perspective and curiosity. And what I mean by that is that those who are creating new ways of doing things are looking at the world through a different lens, as they used to say at, Apple, that these are the crazies, but really their perspectives are unlike those of normal other people in that they're looking to solve problems. Google, Trial Reach, HealthiVibe, Thread, solve problems in completely different ways, and they see them as fascinating puzzles that need to be solved. And so they also bring a different set of tools to the table. The first thing I mentioned, which is curiosity, which is, and I wish Mike was also on the phone too, and I heard this from Tyler and everybody on this on this phone in previous conversations is there's this deep-rooted, often innate, unquenchable thirst to answer the questions that their hearts and heads pose to them every day. And that curiosity is what drives them to want to test these ideas, see them come to life, understand whether they're valid and whether they're important and applicable, and whether they can truly have meaning. And I want to say that that's what's exciting about this panel and people like those on this panel and the companies that they've created, that they run, that they work within, is that for one reason or another, these are people that either put medical research in their crosshairs or fell in its crosshairs, but by their very own nature really pursued finding answers through these most unique of lenses. And so technology, to your question, I think without people like those on this call, it's nothing more than just, wires and electricity. And I think it's really, really important to understand that if we don't marry great people that are passionate about what we're trying to do as an industry with this great technology, it's really not going to be as powerful and impactful as what it can be.
Absolutely. And I think those are some great summarizing thoughts. So we're pretty much out of time, and we would like to thank the audiences for tuning in to this discussion on patient centricity. Again, this is Moal Sumidai on behalf of Applied Clinical Trials, and thank you again.